If you are looking forward to being a mom and expecting to instantly fall in love with your baby as soon as they were born, but that didn't end up being your experience and you actually feel like you're not quite bonded to your baby, you might actually be able to relate to this mom who wrote, "I feel like the worst mom. I love my baby, but I don't feel connected to him at all. He does the same three things every baby does: eats, sleeps, and poops. I expected to be in love with him as soon as I had him, but I don't feel that way. I feel like a full-time babysitter who doesn't get a break. We wanted to be parents so much. I was so excited for him to be born and to start our life together as our new little family. I don't regret him at all. I just don't feel connected to him." Well, I actually can relate to your experience. I felt so bonded with my babies while I was pregnant with them, but as soon as they were born, it was like meeting a completely new person. But because they don't really respond or react very much within the first couple months, it just felt like they were like a pooping potato. But if we haven't hung out before and this is the first time we are doing so, my name is Brianna. I'm a fellow mom and money coach, and here we take questions from moms for moms all about money and real life. And in today's episode, we're going to kind of talk about a little bit more of this sensitive topic. But if you can relate, I would just like to invite you to join into today's conversation and add any of your thoughts or experiences in the comments below to encourage this mom as well as anyone else that may come across this episode. So with that, let's go ahead and dive into today's conversation. So the first thing you said is, "I feel like the worst mom." And I think that this is a very tough place for you to first start from, and I just want to recognize that your feelings are very valid, but I also just want to say that bonding and connecting to your child does not automatically make you the best mom or the worst mom. As long as your child is being taken care of and is loved and accepted, and like they're being fed and they're being cared for, like your baby doesn't necessarily know whether or not you are bonded to them or not just yet at this stage. Now, I'm not a psychologist or anything like that. I'm just a mom, so I'm totally speaking just from my own experience. But I do think that it is very natural to feel this way. In fact, when I was like researching for our conversation today, I actually came across that about 20% of moms feel this way after giving birth. And what I ultimately thought about this statistic is that the bonding and the connection you have with your baby doesn't make you a bad mom, but what does make you a bad mom is like you not taking care of your baby. So as long as you're still fulfilling your motherly duties of taking care of your baby, the bonding connection will automatically just like naturally occur, I think, at least in my experience. But I do want to talk about like different ways that you could help facilitate those feelings, because like I said earlier in our conversation, that I actually did not feel bonded to my babies, either of them, as soon as I gave birth. And it was something that I had to kind of work on. And now I'm like, yes, I was so bonded to them. Like, I love my sons. They are such an important part of my life. So I just want to like validate the fact that it's okay you feel that way, but that does not make you a bad mom just because you're not currently feeling that bond to your new baby. I do think that sometimes we feel more ashamed about the lack of connection if we don't feel bonded to our babies right away. Now, you did say, "I expected to be in love with him as soon as I had him, but I don't feel that way." So when you say that, I do question whether or not you had a traumatic birth experience. And the reason why I ask is because the hormone oxytocin is actually like responsible for that bonding, instant fall in love, like connection between mother and baby. And if you had a fairly traumatic birth experience, then that can impact the hormones and feeling that like love connection with your child. So some of the things that of course can impact the oxytocin levels during our birth experience are epidurals and C-sections, which in my case, I had a C-section for both of them, which I think definitely played a big role in my experience. But other factors that can inhibit oxytocin during birth include stress, fear, anxiety, pain, feeling unsafe, the lack of privacy, challenges with breastfeeding, or even delayed skin-to-skin contact. And even just like listing out several of those, like those are things that most women are going to experience during their natural childbirth experience. And especially, I think that if you had, like I said, a more traumatic birth experience where you can relate to feeling a lot of those symptoms, like, of course, that will most likely impact how much of this oxytocin is released during your birthing process and can then affect your bond with your baby after birth. I had a very traumatic birth experience with my first, so I found out while I was in labor with him after like over 24 hours that he was actually breech. I think at that point, though, it might have been closer to 48. And then I was having like an unplanned C-section. So yes, it was very traumatic for me. That did impact my bond with him after he was born, not to mention the fact that I was incredibly, completely exhausted. And knowing that I might have this very similar experience with my second, knowing like, okay, I'm not going to go through like these natural like birth progressions like of a natural birth, and that I'm going to kind of have oxytocin on my side to help create that connection with my newborn baby. I wanted to be reassured, to set myself up with the fact of like, okay, what do I need to do with my second to help facilitate this bond a little bit faster? And what can I just like be aware of and plan for to know that if I don't feel this bond right away, that it's okay. It is something that I can develop over time, and that doesn't make me a bad mom just because I don't feel that bond right away. Like it feels like, okay, I knew who you were in the womb. Like I recognized your patterns and your movements, and like it felt like you were my baby, and feeling like this big connection because you are physically connected. But then like once they're outside of you, it's just like, okay, you're just, this little ragamuffin, who are you? And we have to get to know like their complete personality as a baby. Like they felt so familiar when you were pregnant and when they were in our womb. But then like on the outside, it's like, okay, I don't know who you are. Like, yes, I know you're my child and I love you from the fact that you are my child, but I don't feel like all of those warm fuzzies just yet. And I think that knowing that I was going to experience these very familiar experiences again kind of gave me reassurance that, hey, this bond, even if I don't have it at the beginning, is something that can be facilitated and created as I get to know my baby after they are born. One thing I do think is really important to bring up in our discussion is the fact like postpartum depression can, of course, impact your bond that you're creating with your baby and can be a huge factor. So if you think that that may be a variable in your current situation, I just highly encourage you to advocate for yourself with, your medical providers or a therapist, or like seek outside counsel if you're not feeling validated that this may be a factor from your medical provider. I will link a postpartum depression screening in the details of this episode, so you can go and take it yourself as many times as you want to, as well as some other resources for you to kind of just like get a little bit more education and kind of like help you determine, is this something that could be a factor in your situation. But please do seek out the advice and the counsel of someone that is certified to have more training and more skill in this area. Again, not an expert in this, just a mom. And I just want you to feel like aware that this could be a factor in your bond that you have or you are trying to establish with your baby. One of the other things he said was that he does the same 3 things every baby does: eats, sleeps, and poops. I feel like a full-time babysitter. So I think really at this stage, and I was talking about this with my husband after we had our baby and we were our first, and we were like reflecting on what our experiences was going to be with our second. And that is like, even he, as the dad, they have to work a little bit more to create a bond with, with your child, with their son after their baby is born, because they don't have the oxytocin levels that release through the birthing process because they're not giving birth, right? So even dads have to go through this experience where they are learning to bond with their now baby, whether that be a son or daughter. And I was kind of talking about that with my husband because he also felt very much like, with newborns, because they just kind of just like, they sleep and they eat and they poop, and that's really all they do. Like I had mentioned, like it kind of seems like they're a pooping potato. There's not a lot of reaction. There's not a lot of smiles. There's not a lot of personality yet. You know that they're your baby, but it's like, okay, who are you really? And they don't start to really developing a personality until around like 8 weeks, or at least that has been our experience. And it's like around that time we've noticed like, okay, they are more alert, like they're starting to create a little bit of a personality, they're being, more responsive, like they start to react a little bit more. And I know that every baby is different as far as like the different milestones, but that is something that we had noticed with both of our sons in our experience, that it's like, okay, at first you're kind of caring for them because like, like this is your parental duty, this is your parental responsibility. And then at that like 8-week threshold, it was like, okay, this is starting to be a little bit more fulfilling. This is starting to be a little bit more fun. Like there's a person in there and not just poop that's coming out of a diaper. I did hear one mom that was kind of commenting on a similar situation with her experience, and she had said like, it's when a human relationship isn't reciprocated, it can be really hard to bond, and that is ultimately what is happening as soon as you give birth. Now some babies are super responsive as soon as they're born, and they're just like this strange anomaly, whereas other babies, they take a little bit longer to be more alert, to be more responsive. So again, your baby might be completely different. Your baby might take a little bit longer to start showing like some of those like interests like we were experiencing with our sons around that 2-month mark. But there are a couple of things that I did find that helped me bond with my baby, and my husband also kind of participated it to help develop his bond with our sons. And that was now some of these things like your husband obviously can't do just because of like the physiology of his role. But for me, it was, breastfeeding, which I had a really challenging time with my firstborn son. So that kind of also, I think, did create a little bit more of a challenge developing that bond so much faster. But cuddling and snuggling, baby wearing, all of these connections that you're making with your baby with these interactions, even if they're not responsive at all, it should be releasing some levels of endorphins within your body, like whether or not you feel it, like I'm sure like things are changing in our bodies that we don't feel or even notice, but because you're consistently doing these things and small levels of oxytocin are being released while you do these connecting moments, that it helps to facilitate and create that bond over time, even if you missed out on that immediately oxytocin like release from like what you would receive from a natural birth experience. Now, outside of like the snuggling and the cuddling and the breastfeeding, some of that you might already be doing, and it's just like, okay, well, again, they're just like, not really, interacting. And for me, I found that when they were awake and they were, even if they're not quite alert very much, like they will look up at you, and taking those opportunities, like when they're awake and when they are looking at you, like interact with them as much as you can. When they were at this age and stage and they would just like, like look up, and it didn't quite seem necessarily that they could focus, on me because of how their eyes are at that age, but like they're looking in my direction. Like I can tell that I have their attention, and just like looking back at them and like holding their hand and kind of talking to them, or, singing to them, even reading them a book, just helps to kind of facilitate that like endearing moments, like trying to create as many endearing moments that I have with them to establish a bond and a connection with them. I would also try to make sure that I would say like, I love you no matter what. I'm so happy you're my son. And, in your case, if you have a daughter, obviously saying those words instead. And that I think like just like reinforces in our own like brain to know like, hey, you are actively consciously making the decision to map in your conscious thoughts that you are bonded to your child. And Also, like making sure that you're taking time to consciously smile at them as well. Because, like, for me, being in like the postpartum stage, like, I had a really, like I mentioned, I had a really challenging time with breastfeeding. Like, I was really incredibly sleep deprived. I felt so sad, and I definitely like feel like I dealt with like baby blues and all of that. And like, when you feel so incredibly down, you do not feel like smiling. And when we smile, that actually, again, creates like these more endorphins in our brains. We know from so many studies that smiling just automatically increases your mood. So physically, consciously smiling at your baby and looking at them, even if you don't feel happy in the moment, can create this natural bonding experience, or help create this natural bonding experience, so that you do feel more connected to your child. I do remember one moment when, after my second son was born, and again, having chosen a repeat C-section this time, and knowing that I might not feel this, immediate bond right away. I remember just being in the hospital room after, the nurses had come in and were checked and were kind of settled, and holding my baby, and my husband had said, like, "Hey, you haven't told him you love him yet." And I was like, "I haven't?" And I was like so shocked that he consciously was aware that I hadn't said that. And he's like, "No, you haven't said that to him." And I was like, "Oh." And then I immediately said, like, "I love you. I'm so happy that you're here. I love you no matter what," to my son. And it's like, it's nice having those reminders from, your husband, or if there's someone else that you can confide in your life that is there to support you, just to like give you some reminders to say, like, "Hey, are you smiling at your baby? Are you cuddling them? Are you telling them that you love them?" Because all of those normal things throughout your everyday, life experience is going to naturally help facilitate that bond to your baby. I also just want to recognize that you're in probably one of the hardest transitions of being a mom. So if you kind of feel like you are wondering, like, why is being a mom harder than you thought, or you kind of wish that your baby came with its own instruction manual, then I'll link up an episode for you to watch next. But until we hang out again, I hope you create a home your heart loves.